The gospel today presents challenging words from Jesus. He came to bring division. He came to divide households. These are not words of Jesus that they print on t-shirts. You won't go to Hobby Lobby and find home decor about these verses. And yet, there they are, and they're important for us to understand. And these can help us. There's two things that we can take from these verses of Jesus. First of all, it expresses that Jesus is God. In that first century Jewish context, the order was God, parents. And it still is in our Christian age because the first three commandments are all about loving God, and the fourth one about loving your parents. So when Jesus says, "Do you have to love me more than your parents?" He's saying, "I am God, and that's why you have to follow me." But secondly, the Catechism puts it this way: family ties are important, but not absolute. It says the first vocation of the Christian is to follow Jesus. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Our first vocation is to follow Jesus. And Jesus himself experienced opposition from his own family, not from his Blessed Mother Mary, but from his extended family. And many of the saints have experienced opposition from their families as well. My favorite saint, St. Alphonsus Liguori, he experienced this in his life. When he was 16, he earned a degree in law, became a brilliant lawyer. For the first 8 years, he never lost a case, and so this made his dad very proud. But Alphonsus was thirsting for God and for desiring perfection. He thought that God was calling him to a religious and a priestly vocation, but his father was adamantly opposed because that meant giving up fame, giving up wealth, and he didn't want his son to do that. Eventually, St. Alphonsus got to the point where he knew that this was what he had to do. One day he went to the church and he took off his sword, which was a sign of his nobility, laid it at the feet of the statue of Mary, and determined that he was going to pursue his path, even in opposition to his father's will. And so later on, it's not surprising that when St. Alphonsus was giving advice to young people about choosing the vocation, he told them, you have to be detached from your parents because they might try to talk you out of it. And St. Alphonsus even said that on the day of judgment, we will find that there will be parents who did not go to heaven because they opposed their children's vocation, or children who will not go to heaven because they listened to their parents opposing God's vocation for them. That's a little strong, but it's worth considering. But maybe we could give some more modern examples. Well, the first one is just like St. Alphonsus. A young man wants to go to seminary, his parents oppose him, or a young woman wants to join the convent, and her parents don't approve of that. Or someone feeling called to become Catholic, but their parents or their family is in opposition to that. Today there's many times when people enter the church, they come from a background with not much religious faith, and so their parents are like, yeah, sure, whatever you like. But if there's some sort of other religious background, it can be challenging for families, for someone to become Catholic. Or another example, a parent or a spouse who wants to start going to Mass with their children, and their spouse is not interested. Or perhaps a child wanting to go to Mass and their parents not wanting to take them. This is kind of sad for me. Sometimes I invite the children, ask your parents to bring you to Mass this weekend. And I think it must be hard for a lot of them to ask their parents to do that. They ask their parents for everything, take me to McDonald's. And their parents are like, yeah, sure. But they have a hard time asking, can we go to church this weekend? And so one final example. You're traveling with your family or your friends, and it's Sunday, and you think to yourself, I should find a way to go to Mass, but I don't want to inconvenience anybody else. I don't want to ruin their plans. These are all challenging situations in which we have to make choices, and many more examples could be given. And so in all of these circumstances, we need to recall that the first vocation of the Christian is to follow Jesus, even if this causes divisions. And we should recognize that there will be blessings for our family members when we make difficult choices, even if it's not what they want. Think about St. Alphonsus again. His father wanted him to be famous and rich. Well, he didn't become rich, but he certainly became famous because he followed God's will for him. Or, a daughter wants to go to join the convent. This is a sacrifice for a family, but think of all the blessings it brings. Or a son wants to go to seminary. Yes, a sacrifice for the family, but many blessings. Somebody wants to become Catholic in opposition to their family's desires. Well, this will bring many blessings to that person and to their family, and so we need to consider that as well. And finally, our second reading speaks a little bit more to this, but more generally, it talks about facing opposition or adversity in our life, because all of us experience this in our Christian life. The letter to the Hebrews was written by St. Paul to those first century Christians, encouraging them and telling them, hold firm in the face of adversity. And so he tells them that they need to persevere and keep their eyes fixed on Jesus. And he says that when you feel weary or when you start to lose heart, you should think about all that Jesus has done and suffered for your salvation. And then you will find in yourself the motivation to keep going. And God will reward us too for our perseverance, especially if we face adversity. There's a famous saying, no pain, no palm, no thorn, no throne, no gall, no glory, no cross, no crown. So when it comes to our Christian discipleship, we need to place Jesus first and continue to persevere despite opposition, despite adversity, and not lose heart as we pursue eternal life.